Hi everyone, this is going to be part 2 of Avenue X Word of Honor's literature, poetry, cultural references. So this will be from episode 14 to episode 37. So this will be a longer episode. There is a lot more to divulge, I imagine, with Avenue X to tell us, and it's really appreciated because it does take a lot of effort to explain it and translate it. So I really am thankful for them for doing this for us. And also, it's just quite nice because it really does open your eyes up. It makes you understand sometimes a bit better the reference and why things are said. And as she's mentioned before, it doesn't always have to be flirtatious because not all of it has to be. It's just also there's a lot of cultural aspects that I think a lot of us foreigners will not understand. And then once we see this, I think we understand better. There were certain things in the first one that I had found out from people who had left me comments, especially like the two sticky breads and the cut sleeves. So I at least knew those references. So I'm really looking forward to what she's going to bring in terms of references, poetry, literature, and also the historical elements of time periods of when people ruled or what dynasty, and that's something that I'm really into. So I'm looking forward to that. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share.
Hello, welcome to another video from Avenue X on the drama 山河令 Word of Honor. This will be my last and second video on the poetry and literature reference that this drama contains. It has already been over a month after it has finished airing in China, and yet does it feel like time has hardly passed? Like I've mentioned before,
more or
my
less a month
videos do not
since I
contain
last watched
all the
it. Maybe just over
literature,
for me.
cultural references this drama has. I just picked out the ones that I think are worth talking about, which gives you a good idea about just how much stuff they've managed to jam into.
I'm looking forward to seeing what else.
So we're gonna pick up from where we've left it last time. Episode 14, when Wen Kexing is drinking. After a conversation with his subordinate, he has this line recited: 知我者谓我心忧，不知我者谓我何求. This comes from, the big poetry classic 诗经, and it means the people who know me would interpret something I do or I say as, wow, he's or she is worried, whereas the people who do not understand me would read it as, wow, what is he asking for? After you watch the whole drama, you know how fitting.
Yeah, that actually really is.
To Wen Kexing as a character,
it really is.
And to everything he wants to do in this world setting. So for people who are interested in learning Chinese language, it's always good to remember this line. You can use it to literally praise somebody as somebody who would understand you. Okay. You can also
Chinese is so difficult, so beautiful.
Occasions when you feel nobody understands you. After episode 14, we head into the big sequence that covers over an episode-long plot about the big congregation that ended up in shit.
I like how she'll swear, but then she'll get shy at other moments.
Alliance. During this time, when Wen Kexing is very, very sarcastically, ironically talking about the Wuhu Meng and commentating on their fight, he quoted many well-known lines in Chinese literature. At the end of episode 14, he said this line, 你方唱罢我登场, which means once you finish singing on the stage, you get off, I immediately get off.
I take your spot?
Describing the show that everyone is putting on, all those pretentious good people who are all attending this big conference.
They must go.
If you read the classic Chinese novel 红楼梦, Dreams of the Red Mansion, or The Story of the Stone, this is one of its most famous lines. The next line actually is 到头来都是为他人作嫁衣裳, which means and in the end of it, you actually are doing something that you cannot benefit from. The people who come later grab
the winning fruit. That makes so much sense to that moment. And also, it's a great set of episodes.
That everybody's chasing after, going crazy about, but you give up your life for it, and then eventually ends up in someone else's hand. Heading over to the next episode, Wen Kexing continues to quote some famous line that means similar things. 眼看他高楼起，眼看他宴宾客，眼看他楼塌了. This line comes from a Qin dynasty play written by Kong Shangren, 桃花扇, literally means peach blossom fan. Okay, very well known. And this line is so famous that other famous literature piece would quote it. For example, 红楼梦, Dream of the Red Mansion and Story of the Stone actually also contains this line. 眼看他高楼起, I watching his tall building rises. So these lines come from the perspective of a witness, of a bystander watching
Which is
something
what they
happening.
are. They are bystanders
watching this person holding big banquets, welcoming all kinds of guests. 眼看他楼塌了, watching his building collapse. These three lines are super famous in this play, and as you can tell, it's super
really
fitting
is,
for
yeah.
Wen Kexing to say that because he is watching it as a show, watching all these people chasing after those things that eventually will turn into nothing. Then heading over to the zombie and cave plotline in episode 18, they were back to back and then talking to each other and quoting a very famous poem and did a little bit adjustment of the original characters that literally made all the audiences scream in China. 幸得君心似我心. It comes from a poem that's written in Song Dynasty. And the original line is 只愿君心似我心, which means I only wish your heart is like my heart.
Two hearts coming
in
together.
the drama version, they changed it into 幸得君心似我心, which means luckily I got
no wonder
your heart
people,
as
yeah,
mine.
no people
so this
reacted,
is the
yeah.
upgraded version of quoting poetry to make it even more fitting for the situation. For Song Dynasty, 宋词, this particular form, it has a lot of patterns. And this one is called 卜算子. It's a particular pattern's name, and it's written by the poet Li Zhiyi. The specific title is literally the first line of this poem, and it's one of the most classic love poetry in Chinese literature.
Remember,
and
love
I think I've
poetry.
mentioned it once in one of my previous videos on Chinese poetry related to dramas. Anyway, I'll quickly recite it and explain what it means to you. 我住长江头，君住长江尾。日日思君不见君，共饮长江水。
she's highlighted the
此
part
水
that
几
she's
时休？
spoken
此恨何
in
时
red.
已？只愿君心似我心，定不负相思意。It means I live at the head of the river Changjiang, and you live at the end of this river. Every day I miss you, but I cannot see you because back then there is no video calling.
Yeah, I imagine there's no video
but we
calling,
drink
yeah.
from the same river. When would the flow of the water in this river end? When would this sadness and regretfulness in my heart stop? I just wish your heart is like my heart.
Sounds quite,
and I will
not just
never
poetic,
betray.
yeah,
this
sad
love
but
between
lovely at the
us
same
and this
time.
promise between us. So that's what this poem means. And at this point, they're already quoting this poem, so it does not matter if it is 社会主义兄弟情, right?
Yeah, it's not brotherly
We all know
love.
what it is. And if you need any further confirmation, well, immediately after they got out of the cave and had this little chat and fight. I've already mentioned this scene in my lip dubbing video
yes,
when
you
they
do.
changed Wen Kexing's line. Well, in that line's close proximity, he also said, 周相公可怜则个吧. Okay, so that's not a poetry reference, but it's a literature and cultural reference. First, 周相公, Zhou is Zhou Zishu's surname. 相公, 99% of the time, is spoken from a woman referring to her husband. If you've watched the concert, on the first day of the concert, when the actress Zhou Ye was dressed up as Gu Xiang, and then Ma Wenyuan dressed up as Cao Weining and had that wedding song and stuff. Afterwards, they changed how they call each other. Ma Wenyuan called Zhou Ye 曹夫人, and then Zhou Ye called Ma Wenyuan. You're no longer 曹大哥, big brother Cao, you are 阿香的相公.
Husband.
So this is an ancient society common term for
I haven't
women
watched
calling
the
husband.
concert, so I know a little bit that's going to happen now.
He's calling him 周相公, teasing about it, and then he said 可怜则个吧. Okay, so please pity, right? Please put your pity on me. The 则个 at the end of the sentence is a very interesting word. It doesn't mean anything. It's one of those words that exists to
Some
show
things can't
a particular
be,
type of
Didn't mean
emotion.
anything, they can't be
It can
translated.
actually mean surprise. It can mean question. It can mean kind of exclamation. So it really doesn't have a specific meaning, and it's a very ancient term. In contemporary Chinese, nobody uses it anymore. But if you go and read Ming Dynasty, Qing Dynasty, even older novels,
interesting to think it's
you'll come
lost.
across this word showing up at the end of the sentence. But there's always a but. Hey, there is a very famous Chinese literature
Nothing wrong with a
piece
but.
that's called 金瓶梅, and it kind of heavily influenced 红楼梦 that came after. For a long time, it was censored in China because of its very promiscuity content. In this novel, this line has been used. The male lead character, who is a rich guy who has a lot of wives, comes to one of his concubines.
There's always someone with a concubine.
And said, 可怜则个吧. Put
It's
your
the way
pity on me.
the way she
Go and
changed her
figure
voice
what that
there.
means and what kind of like image and reference and atmosphere of that scene can be.
Yeah, I get what
This
they
is
said.
totally the scriptwriter's doing. Yeah, she's just showing off how much she knows, and then she's just jamming in obvious and not obvious
Oh
clues for
yeah,
people to
she
go figure.
she put a
Then
lot
head
of
over to episode
clues.
25 when they had that heart-to-heart conversation at Four Seasons Manor, drinking and also selling the
Nuts for
nuts
sponsors.
for the sponsor.
You sell those nuts.
I've kind of explained half of the poetry reference that showed up in their conversation in the name meaning video about 温客行's name in particular. 天涯孤鸿无根行客. After they've said that, at the end of the conversation, 周子舒 stood up and looking into the garden and said this line. 客行虽云乐, 不如
The way she
早旋
shifted the
归.
tone of her
It
voice
is
as
being
well. It
very
sounded really
obvious
sweet.
about what it's talking about, but at the same time being very covert. It kind of happens on both levels. At this point of the drama, right before that, 周子舒 said to 温客行, I'm gonna stay here and living with Cheng Ling. If you want to come back, this is the home that you can come back to. 温客行 obviously is very moved.
It's quite a sweet thing
but
to
then
say.
he stood up and said this line and not looking at 温客行and looking into the garden, which is just such an Asian thing. It's like the moon is really pretty in the Japanese literature tradition. You guys, if you've dabbled in, you know what it means. So 周子舒 stood there and said, 客行虽陨乐，不如早旋归, which comes from a Han Dynasty poem that now has lost the name of the author.
That's a
But the
shame.
poem is called 明月何皎皎, and this line means, although traveling as a guest is very happy, right? You can have a lot of fun on your travel, that's for sure. But 不如早旋归, not as great as
coming back
come
home.
back
Yeah.
home sooner. Without looking at each other, without saying these things out, it just has even more emotional undercurrent going behind the scene. Then head over to the episode 27 where the absolutely famous scene took place. There's
Oh,
one
the
line
fight,
spoken
yeah.
by 叶百一. Before he let these two lovebirds go, he said this line, 天地不仁，以万物为刍狗. This comes from 道德经, the classic of Taoism written by Lao Tzu. First, let me explain 刍狗. 刍狗 is grass tied up dog. So dry grass, dry hay, you make a dog, like you make basically a doll out of balloon, the same thing. In Chinese ancient history, it's something that you use for sacrificial ceremony.
Okay, I understand a lot
Sometimes
better
people
now.
don't have money or they just don't really kill animals, they just use the
Pretend animals out of
pretended
grass, yeah.
animals
Okay.
made out of grass. 天地 is heaven and earth, which means nature or universe or the law of the entire universe operating. 不仁, 不 is not. 仁 is one of the most important virtue that the Confucius advocates to the world. You can Google that and then see articles after articles explaining what that word means. But here, interestingly, it's saying 天地不仁. 天地, the nature, heaven and earth is not 人. Why? 以万物为刍狗. Treating everything in this world as the grass dog that's used for sacrificial ceremony. For the law of universe, it doesn't have any partial treatment to anyone.
Really, sorry, I'm really fascinated by this moment.
What our human world decides to be good or bad, moral or immoral, justified or not. Kind of referencing both to the fact that Wen Kexing's parents are really good people, but they
Which
don't
they
end
were.
up with a good life. Their ending
unfortunately.
is pretty sad. Whereas Wen Kexing, as leader of the Ghost Family,
done
has
bad.
done a lot of wrong things and definitely has killed a lot of people.
But
then, he still gets to get away.
But that can be in life.
Somehow Ye Baiyi is the person who let him go. So Ye Baiyi is saying it's very ironic, but it's also very true, which is the law of the universe kind of treats everything impartially. And if you watch a lot of period Chinese dramas, you will see this line showing up everywhere. And it's very worth remembering. 天地不仁，以万物为刍狗. In episode 29, we will come across Gu Xiang and Cao Weining walking on the path. He started to do his mixed match rapping of Chinese love poetries. As he always does, he first doesn't quote the exact lines, so showing that he probably doesn't remember.
I was going to say, yeah, it's
it very
intentional
well.
that he
The
doesn't
second
remember
is,
it that
He
well.
mixed different stuff together. Which is why Wen Kexing didn't like
Oh,
him the
that's
first
why?
time he saw him. 金风玉露一相逢，天上人间不算数，在天愿为比翼鸟，在地愿结连理树. Okay, let me tell you why this is funny. First line comes from a very famous 词 Song Dynasty, particular type of poetry. And in the original poem, a love poem, it goes like 金风玉露一相逢，便胜却人间无数. Literally means the golden winged and the jade dew, once they meet, they overtake, they become so much greater than everything, so many other things in this human world.
Okay.
As a love poetry, it just means when the two perfect lovers meet, what can happen, right? It's just
There's a lot
so
of perfect
much
lovers
better
in this
than
show.
everything else in this world. You can interpret that on a very flesh level. Okay, because this is a very poem. But then you can
Like
also
how she can't
interpret
say
it
it.
at a higher level, right? As the people who are soulmates, they're perfect, and when they're together, nothing else in this world compares. So that's what the original line means.
But-
It is 胜却人间无数, which means it's better than everything else, countless things in this world. Whereas 小曹
Yeah, and let's see what he changed it to.
天上人间不算数, which literally means what's in heaven and what's in this world, okay? Added together do not count as anything. It's such a bad student that he doesn't remember
the original line,
But
yeah.
the funny thing about this line is it's actually also talking about the story of 牛郎 and 织女, two very famous mythological lover characters in Chinese folklore. A human guy and a goddess. The guy is a cowboy, not a westernized American
not that,
cowboy,
yeah.
literally a guy
Who
who
herds
herds
cows. Yeah.
The lady actually comes from heaven. She's the daughter of the heavenly emperor, and she is the goddess of textile, of weaving stuff. And they got together, they got separated, and they can only meet each other once a year over the bridge that's made by magpie birds. Anyway, it's kind of already hinting if these two characters are as 牛郎 and 织女, the guy and the goddess, it's not gonna end very well for them. Also, the second line kind of confirms that, which is 在天愿为比鸟，在地愿结连理树. Originally coming from the very famous 长恨歌 from 白居易 that I've heavily mentioned in Joy of Life poetry video. This is written by Bai Juyi, who is kind of like a private fan of the love affair of Tang Minghuang, the emperor, and Yang Guifei, one of the most famous beauty in Chinese history.
Okay.
And the original line is 在天愿作比鸟，在地愿为连理枝. In the sky, we want to be birds who fly side by side, and on the ground, we want to be the plants, the trees that grow with their branches intertwined. It is about the love story of the emperor and the concubine that didn't end well in history too. So
Which,
this guy,
again,
while he's
makes
reciting
the
two love
reference.
poetry, first he didn't quote them correctly. Second, they're like
An omen for their relationship. Yeah, now that I know that, it makes it even sadder.
This is definitely intentionally done by the scriptwriter, and she's just showing you what she can do and then adding more information and more meaning behind.
I think that's a really
these
smart thing
lines
that she
for the
did.
observant
Very smart.
audiences to pick them out. Then, to wrap up today's video, there is a poem that got recited twice again in this drama. That's by two supporting roles. But because their love story is tied with this poem, I think it's worth talking
which
about.
character?
柳千巧, 燕鬼, and 雨秋风.
Okay.
This is a poem that comes from Tang Dynasty, and it's
I
actually
hated what
a
happened to her.
song by the official entertainment organization at the time called 教坊. Now, would actually recruit musicians, singers, girls, dancers to perform. So this is a song that's passed down to today. It comes from that period, comes from that background. We do not know who wrote it. Let me quickly recite it and explain it. 平江柳色清，花月遥相守。岁岁复年年，逢此冰消后。几回沧海平，山雪别云秀。一眼万年清，唯此心如旧。平江柳色清. Pingjiang is a river. 柳色, the color from the willow, is 青. 青 can mean blue, but here it can also mean the newly grown, very lively colors coming from the new branches of the willow. 花月遥相守, the flower on the bank and the moon in the sky, far distance apart, but then watches over each other. This gives you a very beautiful picture of the spring with
just
the river, with
the imagery
the
of it
willow,
all.
with flower, and with the moon. 岁岁复年年，逢此冰消后. 岁 literally means age. 复 repeat. 年年 is year after year. So this is a way of double saying year after year, year after year. 逢此冰消后. 逢 coming across, encounter. 此 this. 冰消后 ice melting after. So meeting after the ice has melted, which means meeting after the season has turned into spring. The first half of this poem describes this beautiful picture that takes place year after year, and the second half kind of further explores the idea on time. 几回沧海平，山雪别云秀. 几回 a couple of times. How many times? 沧海, the vast ocean. 平, flattened.
Okay.
So it is showing on a geological kind of scale of time. How many times has the ocean dried out and turned into a flat land over a particular place? 山雪别云秀,
Which is
the
a
snow
long
on
period
the
of time.
mountain also turns into the
Cloud.
cloud. Both are showing
Yeah, over a long
nature's
time, yeah.
time scale, over a long time, how things keep changing. 一眼万年清，唯此心如旧. The last line brings the whole thing back and landed on a human thing in comparison. With one look, 10,000 years become so light. All these changes have happened does not matter because 唯此心如旧. Only this heart is as old, as before, as unchanged as it has always been. So it's a love poem comparing the geological time scale of changes and saying that nature can change however it likes. My heart will never change. It is so ideal and romantic and so not true, right? Because nobody can live as long as
the mountain and the oceans,
and oceans, honestly, right? We probably already reincarnated like 1,000 times when some mountain just moved.
I don't know, I think some people are newly reincarnated. I feel like some people are still new lives, new souls.
Forever, but then when you think about the characters who recite this poem, both of them, Yu Qiufeng, Liu Qianqiao, isn't it ironic that their love is so unreliable and it's perfectly picked, right, for this purpose? Now that will conclude Avenue X's videos on Word of Honor's poetry references. And
we don't need to see the end of that. It's just a goodbye. Again, just really informative. It really does open up the idea of what was being said and the references, and it is sometimes a bit frustrating because of the actual meaning gets so diluted when you try to change it. But I'm really happy that they at least use the subtitles and try to include people all around the world to at least understand a little bit better about the historical side of things. And she explains it so well that I feel like there are certain elements that really make sense. I think there are certain things that I got, but that's just I happen to be lucky in getting that, and other things that makes a little bit more sense now. Thank you for watching.